You're in the field house with the Adam Clapp Academy.
It's all about the ball. Yeah. Tonight, we find a way.
And they knock
A-plus content.
County
Authentic stories.
to be the 7A champions.
Actionable
Georgia
takeaways.
2018.
We're going to attack them like they've never been attacked.
This is the Field House Podcast.
Coaches, welcome back to the Field House. I'm Tad Lowe. In front of me with Coach Mash. Coach Mash, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. It is a Friday. We are on day 2 of the first round of 2025 March Madness, which in my book is easily one of the best sporting events of the year. So I'm super excited about basketball today.
You know, last time we talked, it was the morning after a devastating loss from Georgia to Oklahoma in the SEC championship game. But the good news is they did make it into the tournament. And of course, I'm assuming that they had a great run yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, the Bulldogs won, so that's good.
Set up really, really well for a long run in the tournament. And we all know that that's certainly not true because we're going to be listening to this in the future. And Georgia was indeed knocked out in the first round by Gonzaga. An absolute blowout. So we're going to lick our wounds a little bit and get back to some more basketball.
Yeah, but the good news is they did make the tournament, so that's a big step for the program.
Yep.
And we all know Georgia's a football program anyway, so
as it should be.
Yeah, as it should be. Excited to see what happens with that. We've got a kind of a different format for today, and the conversation is going to be a little bit different than what we've done in the past, where we bring on a coach here and interview. Today, the focus is really going to be on feeder. Coach Mash, why don't you set up what we have planned for today?
Yeah, so today is going to be the first of our feeder focus series. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to narrow down some of the stuff we talked about on here to be relevant to the feeder community. Tad, you and I both come from the feeder world, and it's where we spend a lot of our time. So we know coaches who crave this kind of discussion, and we love it. You and I love talking about it all the time. So we thought, well, let's put something together here under the Field House. Really specifically focused to feeder. And we're going to call it the Feeder Focus. We're going to make a series of it. The idea is we're going to introduce a feeder topic or a theme for the day, and then we're going to discuss through that. So, for example, today is going to be all about feeder scheme.
Which is very timely and a great time to talk about it because a lot of feeder programs, a lot of coaches are getting together and really starting to kind of think about planning for the upcoming season. Feeder's always interesting because sometimes you know your personnel, sometimes you don't really know what your personnel is going to be going into the season because you could have kids moving in, kids moving out, kids that are entering the program that maybe have decided that they're going to start football later than maybe some of the kids that you currently have.
And the coaching staff too.
And the coaching
staffs are fluid throughout, the years of feeder. You got coaches coming on, one year who fall off the next year and you replace with somebody else. And so, particularly when you're talking about scheme, these are discussions that come up. Like, did you lose knowledge on scheme, or did you gain knowledge, or how do you think about that?
So let's kick it off. Let's settle in their scheme. So when we talk about scheme, what does that mean to you? Yeah,
so I think we use that word a lot, and I think generally when people hear the term scheme, they think playbook, right? That's my playbook, and I think that's generally that's the way I look at it. More broadly, I look at scheme as the operating system of your program or of your team. So, you have your mission, and, our mission at Parkview is build men of integrity. And then we have our goals and our targets underneath that mission. And one of those, football related, is to play as many games as possible. And so scheme then becomes your execution operating system to be able to play as many games as possible. So how you do things actually on the field, your tactics, that sort of thing. So that's what I think of scheme. But that's kind of broad-minded type stuff, but that's your playbook. That's what you do on the field.
Pause right there because you said something that was important, and Clack has talked about this a lot. Before we get to scheme, typically you set out what are your goals for the season. And Clack is very quick to say, hey, let's put a red flag. Let's not say our goal is to make the playoffs. Our goal is to win region. Our goal for the season is to play as many games as possible. Right? And it's pretty critical because sometimes, as he mentions, you may get into the season and you may find out you're not going to win the region. But it doesn't mean you can't make the playoffs. And you don't want your kids to quit because you didn't reach one of the goals that you set out.
Right.
So setting a goal to play as many games as possible is a really good way to make sure that you get buy-in, effort, and get everybody giving 100% to the last game of the season. So first and foremost, we're going to set our goal of playing as many games as possible. Now we're going to say, okay, so what is the scheme that we're putting in place in order to make that happen? You're a defensive guy. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking for on the defensive side of the ball when it comes to scheme?
So, generally, and I think most coaches probably fall into this, we go with what we're comfortable with. We go with what we know. And I think that's important, right? Because it really, what matters most is what you can teach to the kids. And so if you know it really well, you can probably teach it really well. And so I think most of us start out with an idea of what we're going to do scheme-wise. So, my base is typically, going into a season, I'm going to think about basing out of a 4-3, four down front. Coverage is pretty flexible there. So, but ultimately, I'm going to start that. That's sort of my anchor spot. But what's interesting is having the ability to flex that, because we may be talking about our defense this upcoming season, and I'm talking a 4-3. We show up in summer, we might have kids that are better suited for a 3-4 or a 3-3 or something like that. So we do have to be flexible, right? Not anchor on that one, what we know best. Mm-hmm. What about you? I mean, more on the offensive side.
Mm-hmm. Well, kind of the same as that thing. I mean, from an offensive side, there's things that obviously you're going to have in the playbook, the scheme. Your basic. You're going to have your power plays, right? You're going to have your counter plays. I typically like to run a zone, inside zone, outside zone run concept. You're going to have your quick hitters. You're going to have your passing concepts. But the same as that thing, you've got to be flexible, right? You can't just go in and say, "Here's the playbook," right? Before you know what your personnel is. For example, last year we ran a bit of a power playbook, but our line wasn't equipped to be a power blocking line, and our running backs, not to any fault of theirs, they were very athletic, were not power backs, right? They were more quick, speed, find the hole. So, we had to make adjustments. As the season went on, but
but you do have to start from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it goes back to kind of what what you're comfortable with, and then adjusting it from there. One of the things I think about early on with scheme, and to be honest, like throughout an entire season, is, and this is a kind of a core point on what I do on defense, is simplicity is everything. Mm-hmm. So the simpler I can make the scheme and the system, the more flexibility I have to make changes as needed, and keep everything together. And I'd say that one of the things I want to talk about is what's core to your scheme, what's a must-have, regardless of what actual playbook you run or formations or plays. What must you have in your scheme? So, like from the offensive side, what's important there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, for us, you do have to have that short down play, right? So you do have to have some sort of power play. You've got to have a quick hitter, right? You've got to have something that they're blitzing that you can get out of the quarterback's hand quickly to stop that blitz. You got to have something that you can get to the outside, some sort of misdirection that you can get to the outside to really test the edge and make the defense think differently. I like to have motion also because I like to see pre-snap. Mm-hmm. Are they playing man? Are they playing zone? In the 6th, 7th, 8th grade, your defenses are not that complicated. And sometimes, you're going to see, players are sometimes playing zone by mistake. It's not like, man, 3 guys are playing man, but 1 guy's playing zone. No, he's probably just out of place, But I do like to have some motion in there just to try to help get some early reads.
And motion is great at the feeder level. I mean, it's obviously at all level, but don't be afraid of motion at the feeder level. As an identification tool, like you said, on the coverage, but also just getting them misaligned. I mean, I think at the feeder level, the number one cause of defense is giving up points is they're not in the right spot at the right time. And so by motioning, right, you can start to get them out of that, maybe get some numbers on your side.
But I do think one of the things that's really important, you hit on it, simplicity, right? Sometimes, and I look back over the last several years as being an offensive coordinator, I can say there's times that, looking at the defense, I can draw up a hell of a play. I can draw up some great stuff. Now, can we execute it? That's another question, right? And so you really do have to know kind of how much your players can take. It's a balance, right? You don't want to dumb it down too much. I like to start the season with 10 to 12 plays that we're going to get these down. We're going to know these like the back of our hand. So no matter what, at any point through the season, we can rely on these plays, right? And then I kind of like to build around that. And this is where utilizing the talent that you have on there. And those plays that we build around there, we're not going to run those all season long. We may plan specifically for a specific, opponent, a specific, situation that we're going to run those plays. And we may run it for 1 week. We may never look at it again for the rest of the season. And we just go back to that core. And then, so again, going back to the scheme, is that core built on power? Is that core built on, speed? Is it built on, on sweeps and inside and outside zones? That's where it all depends on your player personnel.
Absolutely.
I wish, and I got to say, I've not had the luxury of having a line that overpowers the defensive side. Never had it. We've always been undersized, and so we just haven't really been able to play a true power style football.
Which is fine, right? I mean, that's knowledge that and now you can, there are ways that you can get around that. Right?
And so, but I think going back to the question at hand, from an offensive side point, and I would say this for any of the young coaches out there that are trying to plan something, have 1 or 2 plays that are going to be, a power play that can get you that 1 or 2 yards when you really need it. Have 1 or 2 quick hitter plays that you can keep the blitz, at bay if they're bringing 6, which sometimes they'll bring 6, sometimes they'll bring 7. Play after play after play in feeder school, you need something that can get them off beat, and something that has some motion element to it as well, so that way you can get a pre-read on the defense.
Yeah, when I think about non-negotiables for scheme, the first is, and doesn't have anything to do with the field, I mentioned this before, was it's got to be simple, it's got to be adjustable, and I've got to be able to teach it, and they've got to be able to learn it. So that simplicity is priorities 1, 2, and 3. But the other pieces now come down to on the field and what the scheme looks like. So for me, the non-negotiables are, my base is typically a spill to force defense. So I'm going to have my inside guys who are attacking inside hip, forcing the ball to make a change of direction, right? And we talk about force. Force doesn't just mean contain, for me. Force a change of direction. So if that ball's going outside and I'm the force player on his outside hip and the spill players are spilling the inside hip to me, my job as the force player is to either force him to cut back into the spill or to bubble out to try and get over me. So either way, I've done my job. I've forced a change of direction, and now the rest of the defense is rallying to the ball. So I've got to have spill and force on every single alignment, every single front, every single coverage has got to be locked tight with spill and force. And just as importantly, the players on any given call have to know whether they are spill and force. What I tell them is if the minimum about this upcoming play that we call is whether you're spill or force, that's good enough. If you forget everything else, as long as you know whether you're spill or force, then we'll be okay. Of course, I want them to know, but again, keeping it as simple as possible. I did want to shift up here and go into another topic here.
Let me ask you one thing before we go in there, okay? Spill and force. So from a defensive standpoint, are you going to the season with a set number of blitz packages?
No. I mean, in the playbook, there are, there's every blitz that you would want to call on at that level. So it's there. Are we going to use it? I don't know. My philosophy on things like blitzing is blitz if you need to. If you don't, if you're getting it done up front, why add complexity to the play call? So yes, we've got them. Are we going to use them? I don't know. Again, getting back to simplicity is everything. The way we teach them early. We install throughout the summer. It's all word association based, right? So our mob blitz, right? We might call mob, Mike through B. Right, mob. Our magic blitz. Kids love this. They do the magic symbol, magic. Mike through A, right? And so those are really easy to do, and just the combinations of those are kind of what we'll put together week to week. But I don't necessarily consider like a blitz package. I just have some blitzes we can call. We may call, we may not.
Interesting. I think I know where you're going to go with the second topic, right?
It's a good one.
Yeah. So we're talking feeder football, right? And the question is, how much of that feeder scheme, how much of that feeder playbook is coming from your high school varsity coach? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, this is probably number one topic of that first spring coaches meeting. Are we running varsity? I think on paper, right, it makes sense. As most of us know who've been there, in execution, it's a little bit more difficult. I think it's really, really hard for a feeder team with the time constraints that they have. They don't have 6 days a week with their kids. They got 3, and of that, those 3 days a week, it gets, by the time you get warmed up, by the time you do defense, offense, whatever, you have very little time. So a varsity scheme is really tough to do with those constraints. But I think that there are different models of it. I mean, there are some programs that are really well suited for that. I think you were talking about one earlier. Was it
West Trinity?
Yeah, that's right. So do they run their?
They pretty much they're installing their varsity playbook. I mean, a simplistic version of it down at the feeder level, and running those, basically running that offensive playbook, essentially just like they would at the varsity level. So that way, by the time the kids get into 9th grade, 10th grade, they're familiar with the language, they're familiar with the schemes, they're familiar with the plays. And they can just build on it to a more complex level when they get to that, the ability to handle the complexity that comes with that. But on the flip side, I'm in the feeder. We're in the feeder system, and I've sat down. I've talked with Steven Jackson, who's the offensive coordinator at Milton, and I said, should we be running the varsity playbook? And he says, absolutely not. He goes, and I'll tell you why. He goes, your personnel doesn't match what we have.
You don't have our kids.
Yeah. And he's like, and I'll tell you, he goes, I don't even know, this was last year, I don't even know what 2026 is going to look like, because, I really don't know what our personnel is. We're not going to have Luke Nickel. We can do certain things with Luke Nickel that that you can't do if you don't have him, right? And so personnel is going to look different, plays are going to look different. And he goes, so I just really, so at the feeder level, no, in Milton, we do not utilize the high school playbook. But then there's other programs out there that there's a hybrid, and I do think a hybrid's a good balance, right? To have some core set plays that you're going to see if you're going to stay in the system if you're going to stay in this program for 7 years, 8 years, it'd be good to have some core plays. We talked about the need to have 10 to 12 base plays that you can run at any given time. So I do think it's important that you have a small set plays that you can run. I think having some core language. I'll tell you one of the things going back to even when I was coaching in the first grade, second grade level, Clack went out and worked with the kids at the NAFL, and the first thing he taught the kids, eagle claw. How to hold the ball. What are the 4 points of holding the ball? Yep. And it was so important for him to have that language at starting the first grade level. So by the time they got to the high school level, they knew what eagle claw was. They knew the 4 points of contact when they were getting with him. So I think little things like that, a hybrid version of that, where you're taking some of those elements. Do we need to run the whole playbook? No, we're not going to run the whole playbook. But I do think having those core things that are foundational things in the high school level is really good to integrate at the feeder level. So, my recommendation to you, let's be honest, most feeder programs are made up of volunteer dads that are full-time accountants, full-time sales reps. They're not full-time coaches, right? And they're doing their best because they're passionate about coaching kids, they're passionate about football, and they're doing their best to put it together, but they're not experts. We're not experts, right? So I recommend that, if you have a high school coach who's really involved in the feeder program, awesome. Sit down, have coffee with them, talk about it. If maybe they're not as involved in the feeder program, reach out to them and see if you can set that up, and try to get just some core language that you can bring down to the feeder level, and so the kids can rally behind it. And one, you're going to get make them feel closer to that program, but two, you're going to be teaching them things that they're going to have a leg up when they get to high school, because they're already familiar with some of these, some of the conversations that are being had.
Yeah, well, and you hit on a really important point, talking about that hybrid approach, and I think that's the answer, at least from my perspective, or for me, is I'm going to stay away from the playbook scheme of the varsity, but I'm going to lean really heavy into the vocabulary, the terminology, the concept of how we teach blocking or tackling, like you said, ball security. That's the stuff that I want to mirror with the varsity. That way, they are stepping up as they get into the high school, right? They don't have to go over that stuff anymore. And who knows? Like the varsity scheme might change year to year anyway. So, is that really the right thing for your kids? Probably not. If you can do it, maybe that's good. But I do like taking those core elements and making those part of your program, taking those from varsity. So we've talked kind of high level about scheme, what scheme means to us. Should we be looking at varsity scheme, that sort of thing. Let's take that now to more execution. So scheme, week to week game planning. Coming from the defensive side of the ball, it's really easy for defensive coaches to fall into a new defensive scheme every week that's tailor-made for your opponent, right? We all love to watch film and we break it down and pad all the plays. And so, hey, I see what they're going to attack me with. I'm going to put together the perfect defense to beat that. The problem becomes when you're changing your defense every week. Even if it's small changes, you got to be careful with those. But when you are making those changes every week, kids are thinking too much. If they're thinking too much, they're not playing fast enough. Again, going back to simplicity is everything. I want their assignments to be muscle memory, so they're not thinking, so they're going. I think, again, on the defense, when I'm game planning, I fell into a trap early on of changing that scheme every week, and it just got really confusing for the players. So now I really back off on that. And our defense is our defense. We think that we have answers for most of what most offenses will do. It's just a matter of understanding when we need those answers, and in the game being able to, in real time, being able to call those up, rather than just putting something new in every week.
Yeah.
I don't have time for that.
I think the defensive side of the ball is a little bit different than the offensive side. Offensive side, you've got to have new wrinkles every week, right? Because if coaches are really spending time, they're looking at the film, they're analyzing it, they're seeing what you're doing, what you do well. They're targeting on who your dude is, right? They're game planning for your dude, which you got a game plan for their dude. But you definitely need to have a couple wrinkles. The question is, how much does it vary from what you do? And one side note here, I would want to caution to coaches is or a word of advice, I should say, is make sure if you are the offensive coordinator that you are surrounded by like-minded coaches.
Yes.
That
That's a big one.
That are aligned with what you're doing, and it's your role as the offensive coordinator to get that alignment. It's the role as the head coach to make sure everybody's aligned. But you've got a role as that leader and the offensive coordinator to get alignment. But I will tell you, one of the challenges with, at the feeder level is, again, dads are doing it, volunteer coaches, super passionate, and everybody has a play they ran that's a great play. Everybody saw something in college football that worked awesome. Everybody saw something on Sundays, and they want to bring it into the playbook. They're not the same caliber athletes.
Yeah.
Right? These are not D1, Saturday CBS star
Yeah.
SEC athletes. So those plays, look a lot different, when you've got the best talent in the country executing it at all levels, on the line, everything. Two, it's, those guys are doing 2 a day. They're practicing all the time. They have we have 3 days a week, right? Let's not overcomplicate it. So it gets back to that complication, that simplicity aspect of it. Have the plays drawn up for your dude. Have the plays that are drawn up that looks like it's going to your dude, but it's really going to somebody else, right? And the last thing I'll say is, again, I love having 1 or 2 plays that we can execute, that we know that when we get to a game situation, there is nothing bigger, and a more problem moment than we've got a play that we know we're going to run, that the defense knows we're going to run,
That's what I was going to say.
and that we know the defense knows we're going to run, and we're still going to run it down your throat, or we're still going to execute it, But in order to do that, you got to have those core plays that you can execute like the back of your hand.
Yeah, that's right. And like you said, if it's simple enough, then week to week, per the game plan, right, you can make some tweaks to those or make them look different, hit the same but look different, right? And that's the idea on offense. But you brought up a point there. Where's the dude? Where's that guy? And at the feeder level, probably more than any other, 1 or 2 players on each sideline are going to have an outsized impact on that game. And so when I think about game planning, I'm not thinking about game planning to the scheme of the opponent. I'm going to focus the start of my game plan on what am I going to do with that guy. Really interesting story. So this really I've got a story from a few years ago that has really informed how I make decisions on game planning and things and trying to plan for that dude going forward. So this was with our class of 2025s. I believe this was their 7th grade season. It was over at Milton. We were playing North Forsyth. North Forsyth was sort of the dominant team in the league at that time. They had, I think, the best player in all of GMSAA as a running back. He's a running back and a middle linebacker. Just a super fast kid, tough as nails, like loved violence kind of kid. And so we really had to account for him going into this game and on the offensive side of the ball. And I was coaching offensive line at the time, and we had a plan for him. We knew where he was going to be. We knew where he was coming from, and so we had him locked up. Come game time, guess where he doesn't show up? At middle linebacker. He shows up at one of the edge rushers. We didn't know which one, right? Play to play. And he terrorizes the whole game. And that was it seems so simple, right? But that was like a revelation to me that, hey, they know who my guy is. Put him where they don't think he's going to be.
That's great, yeah.
And if he's that guy, truly is that guy, he's going to be able to do it. And so, we've got a ton of mileage out of that strategy of showing up with our best dude somewhere where they didn't expect him to be.
Yeah.
So that's how we plan for our dude, because we know they're planning for that, and we want to put him in a spot where he can make the play. And then, when we're looking at the other side, when we're on that offensive dude, that guy who's just going to try and run all over us, they're going to give him the ball 40 times a game. He probably ran for 800 yards last week. So how are we thinking about him? Again, keeping everything as simple as possible and making sure I've got simplicity, spill, and force. And other than that, I may not make a whole lot of changes. Now, if that dude is like a receiver, sure, that's going to impact your coverage. But I'm pretty confident in our base, or at least our base with adjustments, to handle that dude. And I don't want to make that dude something that he's not.
Yeah.
Okay? We're going to play. If he beats us, fine, he beats us. Right? But, we're going to build into our system a way to handle either a running back, a wide receiver, or a quarterback who's a dude.
And what are you going to do to stop Anthony Summers-Dixon?
If we can get a 12th or 13th defender on the field, that would be awesome. That'd be a good start.
Yeah, that would be a good start. So, So I think this is a really, we could talk about this for days and hours, and this is one of the things that football coaches love to do is just talk these conceptual things. So our plan is to have more of these, and we're going to expand it. We're going to invite some feeder coaches out here. We're going to do more of a feeder forum and kind of get some perspectives from a couple different programs. So I'm really excited and looking forward to that. Just some final thoughts and final takeaways for today's conversation for coaches as they begin planning for the upcoming season.
Yeah, related to scheme, that's the theme that we're talking about. I've said it 100 times. I'll say it 100 more times. Simplicity is everything. Got to be simple enough that your kids can get it and play fast, but also simple enough where your adjustments aren't a waterfall of changes, where you can make tweaks here and there within your simplicity. I think that's the number one takeaway I tell everybody. When you think scheme, think simple first, particularly at that feeder level.
Yeah, same thing on offensive side. Simplicity. Have just a core. Start with the core base of plays. Understand your personnel, but simple plays that these kids are going to know like the back of their hand. Come week 6, man, you don't want to have any questions about how to execute this play, right? Because by that point, the coaches have seen seen the kids. They know who your personnel is. You want to be able to have some plays that you can rely on when you really need it in the crunch. And those plays probably aren't going to come from stuff that you just installed a week or 2 weeks before. It's going to come from the core base plays that you've been running all season. So,
look, I'm super excited just overall about what we're going to be doing with this feeder discussion. So, if you're listening out there, coming up, we've got some themes that we want to talk about, such as building a staff. How do you put together a staff? Who, what are the key roles you have to have? What are the kind of the optional type roles that aren't necessarily position, or on the field related? How you think about the phases of the season. even feeder football now is moving to like a full time. Kids are lifting in December, January, February, hitting the field in March, April, right?
It's already been going. They started.
So how do you think about breaking that up
Mm-hmm.
and communicating that then? So, sort of topics like that I think are top of mind, different times of the feeder season.
Mm-hmm. And again, I like one, I'm excited about bringing on some different perspectives up here because I love the conversations, love hearing what other people are doing out there. And it's just a quick plug, if it's something that you're interested in and you want to be a part of the conversation, again, reach out to us. You can reach out to me at X, at Tad Lowe. You can reach out to Coach Mash, at Spill the Kickout. And we'd love to hear from you. And, certainly would love to understand your perspective and your thoughts on these conversations. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the conversation today. We're going to have more of these. So look forward to future episodes on Feeder Focus. And until then, we'll see you on the field.
Let's go watch some basketball.